A mother of two walks out of her home for a simple shopping trip and never returns. 12 years later, her son, who had now become a detective, finds her photo in the house of a criminal. This unraveled the whole mystery behind her disappearance. For years, the Woods family had been the kind of home that made neighbors smile whenever they passed by. James and Harriet were never wealthy, but their laughter was rich enough to fill every corner of their small house. James Woods, once a hard-working supervisor at a local factory, had lost his job during a mass layoff. The blow shook him deeply, but Harriet, strong, supportive, warm-hearted Harriet, became the pillar the family leaned on. She picked up extra shifts, cooked dinner even when exhausted, and reminded James daily, "We still have each other. That's enough." Their sons, Samson at 15 and Jamal at 13, adored their mother for her strength and admired their father for the calm dignity he carried despite his struggles. Every evening used to feel like a celebration of unity. Samson would sit at the dining table doing homework, Jamal would chase their old dog around the yard, and Harriet would sing softly in the kitchen while preparing dinner. James would watch his family with quiet gratitude, convinced that no matter what life took from him, it had left him with something far greater. Their home was imperfect, but it was happy, honestly, beautifully happy. And then, everything changed. The shift in Harriet Woods did not arrive like a thunderstorm. It didn't roar or announce itself. It came quietly, almost politely, slipping into the household like an unwelcome guest the family didn't notice at first. It began with a single late night. Harriet returned home long after dinner had gone cold. She smelled faintly of perfume, not the soft floral scent she usually wore, but something stronger, sharper. James, who had been sitting on the couch waiting for her with worry creasing his forehead, tried not to overthink it. When she walked in, he forced a smile and asked gently, "Everything okay? You're late." "Work," she said shortly, dropping her bag on the coffee table and brushing past him. She didn't look at him long enough for him to see her eyes. James told himself it was nothing. Everyone had bad days. But the next night, she came home late again. And then the next. And the one after that. Before long, the sweet, dependable Harriet the family knew seemed to vanish into the night, replaced by a woman who slipped into the house long after the boys were asleep and her husband's dinner hunger had turned into quiet resentment. Every time James asked what happened, she answered with irritation, as though his concern was nothing but noise. "Why are you always questioning me? It's work, James. You wouldn't understand. Just leave it alone." The boys felt the change too. Jamal, the younger one, missed her presence at the dinner table. He used to tell her stories about school, about the boy who couldn't pronounce spaghetti, or the girl who always gave him her extra pencil. Now there was no one to listen. When he tried to wait up for her one night, he fell asleep at the table, and James carried him to bed without saying a word. Samson, at 15, was old enough to read the tension simmering beneath the surface. The house felt different, heavy, quiet in a way that made his chest tighten. His mother walked differently now, hurried, as though she was always trying to escape something. Sometimes she returned home laughing softly to herself, her cheeks flushed, her hair messy in a way that didn't come from work. Sometimes she returned with her face blank, her gaze distant. But she always returned late. One night, Samson woke up thirsty around midnight. He padded softly to the kitchen for a glass of water, careful not to wake his father. But as he reached the hallway, he froze. A voice. His mother's. Not her usual voice. Not the stressed, frustrated tone she used on them lately. This one was light, warm, almost breathless. He heard the unmistakable sound of her giggle, something he hadn't heard directed at their father in months. Samson peered around the hallway wall. The kitchen light was off, but the glow from her phone illuminated half her face. She was leaning against the counter, her posture relaxed in a way Samson hadn't seen in a long time. Her lips curled into a smile as she whispered into the phone. He couldn't make out every word, but he heard enough to understand the tone. Soft, teasing, intimate. "Stop it," "You're crazy," she whispered, covering her mouth to stifle another laugh. "Not now. They're sleeping." "No, you're not allowed to say that." Samson stood frozen. His first thought was confusion. His second was fear. The third was a slow, sinking dread he couldn't explain. This wasn't how mothers talk to anyone except their husbands. He stepped back quietly, returning to his room before she could see him. He lay in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling as her giggles echoed in his mind. His chest tightened with a feeling he didn't have a name for yet, something sharp and unfamiliar. The next morning, Harriet was back to her cold, distracted self. She barely heard Jamal greet her. She brushed past Samson without noticing the way he watched her, like he was seeing her for the first time. Over the next few weeks, Samson became hyper-aware. He noticed everything. The way she applied makeup before leaving for her late shifts. The way she glanced at her phone and smiled at messages she never allowed anyone else to see. The way she defended her lateness more aggressively than before. James tried to talk to her again one evening. He had been sitting by the window for hours, watching the street, waiting for her headlights to appear. When she finally walked in, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and unfamiliar cologne, he approached her. "Harriet, please," he said softly. "Can you just tell me what's going on? You're never home anymore. The boys miss you. I miss you." Her face hardened. "James, I'm tired. I'm tired of being treated like a suspect in my own house. I work. I'm exhausted. Stop making this harder." She brushed past him, leaving James standing alone with a pain in his eyes that Samson would never forget. Samson felt torn between anger and guilt. He wanted to protect his father, but he also wanted to pretend nothing was happening, because facing the truth would destroy them. But the late nights continued. The secret of giggles continued. And the Harriet they loved drifted further away each day. One night, Samson followed the sound of her voice again. This time she spoke more clearly, more boldly, as if she no longer cared who heard. "I promise. I'll try," she whispered. "Just not tonight. He's awake." "Yes, I know. Me too." Samson's stomach twisted. "He's awake." She meant his father. He felt tears sting his eyes. His mother was slipping away from them, piece by piece. And the worst part? None of them understood why. But deep inside, Samson felt a quiet dread, an instinctive warning that whatever was happening would not end with just late nights or whispered phone calls. Something darker was coming. Something the family was not prepared for. The day Harriet disappeared began like an ordinary Saturday. Quiet, warm, and deceptively peaceful. James had just finished his morning medication, and the boys were in the living room, arguing gently over what cartoon to watch. Harriet came downstairs dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, her hair tied up, her purse slung over her shoulder. "I'm going shopping," she said casually, as if the house wasn't suffocating under weeks of tension. "I won't be long." James looked up from his wheelchair, surprised. "Do you need one of us to come with you?" She shook her head quickly, almost too quickly. "No. I'll be fine." Samson noticed the way her fingers trembled slightly on the purse strap. Something about her tone felt rehearsed, hollow. She wouldn't look him in the eyes. She just reached for the door, offered a thin smile that didn't reach her face, and stepped out into the sunlight. The door closed behind her with a soft click. None of them knew that it would be the last sound she ever made in that home. Hours passed. The boys kept glancing at the window every time a car drove by. James kept checking the clock, rubbing his forehead, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut. By evening, unease turned into worry. By nightfall, worry twisted into panic. James called her phone. No answer. He called again. Straight to voicemail. Samson tried once too. Then Jamal, his voice shaking as he asked, "Mommy, where are you?" There was only silence. By midnight, James knew something was wrong. Deeply, dangerously wrong. He called the police. The search began the next morning. Officers questioned neighbors, checked bus stations, combed through markets and roads. Volunteers joined as days turned into nights, nights into weeks. Posters with Harriet's picture appeared on light poles, store windows, church boards. Her smile beamed from every corner of the city, but in the Woods home, that same smile felt like a blade twisting in the wound. Detectives canvassed the area again and again. No surveillance captured her. No witness reported seeing her. No bank transaction appeared after the moment she walked out the door. It was as if Harriet had stepped into the air and dissolved. The city buzzed with whispers, the kind that slip under doors and erode hope. Some neighbors murmured that she had finally run off with someone else. "I'm not surprised," they whispered behind cupped hands. "She changed." Others insisted something bad had happened. "You don't just vanish," they said. "Not like that." But none of the rumors brought comfort. They only thickened the fog of uncertainty that hung over the Woods household. James declined slowly under the weight of guilt and fear. He sat by the front door every day, staring through the screen as if waiting for her shadow to appear. "She'll come home," he whispered often, though no one had asked. "She'll walk through that door. You'll see." But his voice shook more each time he said it. Samson carried his pain differently. He replayed every memory of the past weeks, the late nights, the phone calls, the distant looks. A piece of him wondered whether her disappearance was connected to whatever secret she'd been hiding. But another piece, the softer piece, prayed desperately that she was alive. Jamal cried more than he spoke. At 13, he was old enough to understand loss, but too young to accept it. At night he slept in Samson's room, afraid that if he was alone, he too might wake up to find someone missing. Days stretched into weeks. Weeks dragged into months. The police case went cold. Harriet Woods remained missing, a name on a fading poster, a woman swallowed whole by uncertainty. Samson and Jamal stopped waiting by the window. They stopped counting days. They stopped hoping for a miracle that refused to come. And slowly, painfully, they began to accept the cruel truth. Their mother was gone. Not just missing. Gone. Forever. But what none of them knew was that the truth of her disappearance was buried in a place darker than rumor, deeper than fear. And one day, many years later, it would claw its way back to the surface. 6 months passed, but time did nothing to soften the wound Harriet left behind. Her disappearance remained an open, bleeding scar across the Woods household. The search teams had returned to their routines, the neighbors had tired of whispering theories, and even the police had stopped giving James reassuring smiles. Only the boys still searched the front door with their eyes every time the wind rattled it, hoping, begging, for it to open and reveal her. James tried his best to stay strong, but grief settled into his bones like an infection. His once steady hands trembled when he lifted a cup. His voice, once loud and jovial, now cracked when he tried to say simple things like, "Dinner's ready," or "Good night." Samson had started doing most of the cooking. Jamal kept track of the laundry. They pretended they were fine, but the house felt hollow, echoing their mother's absence in every corner. Stress ate James from the inside out. First came the sleepless nights, then the chest pains, then the dizzy spells that made the room shift like the deck of a storm-tossed ship. The doctor warned him it was his heart reacting to the emotional trauma, but James never listened. He kept insisting, "My boys need me. I can't break down now." But grief doesn't negotiate. One cold night in early December, Samson woke to a strange, choking sound. He rushed out of his room and found his father slumped on the living room floor, one hand clutching his chest, the other reaching helplessly toward the staircase as if trying to call for them. Jamal came stumbling in behind his brother, eyes wide with terror. "Dad? Dad!" Samson shouted, dropping beside him. James tried to speak, but the words dissolved into a painful rasp. His eyes flickered between his sons. Fear, apology, love, then slowly rolled upward as the strength left his body. The ambulance came, the neighbors gathered. The boys cried until their voices cracked. But the verdict was final. James was gone. The funeral was a blur of black clothing, murmured condolences, and long embraces that never filled the void. Samson stared at the coffin the entire time, numb. Jamal clung to him like a shadow, trembling. They weren't just grieving a father, they were grieving their last tether to the life they used to have. In the days that followed, a decision had to be made. With no mother, no father, and no stability left, the boys were taken in by their father's younger brother, Uncle Raymond. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't warm either. His house felt like a place for visitors, not a home. Samson and Jamal slept in a cramped spare room, their few belongings stuffed into a corner, their grief packed even tighter inside their chests. A week after they moved in, Detective Hale, the man assigned to Harriet's missing person case, visited Uncle Raymond's house. Samson came downstairs expecting another empty update, the kind that usually ended with, "We're still looking." But Hale's expression held something different this time. Not hope, but honesty. He placed a hand on Samson's shoulder and said quietly, "Cases like your mother's. Sometimes the answers show up years later." It wasn't comfort. It wasn't even a promise. It was a warning wrapped in truth. Samson nodded silently, but those words pierced him. Years. How were they supposed to wait that long? How were they supposed to grow up not knowing whether their mother deserted them, or whether something dark had swallowed her whole? As the detective walked away, Samson felt something shift inside him, a slow, determined burn. Years slipped by like pages turning in a book Samson never asked to read. The wounds left by his parents' disappearance and death didn't fade. They simply hardened, forming the backbone of the young man he was becoming. The move to Uncle Raymond's house hadn't been easy. Grief sat at the dinner table with them every night, silent but heavy. Samson quickly realized that if he didn't build a future for himself and his brother, no one else would. So he threw himself into becoming the kind of person who could uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. He started studying like he was waging war. While other kids played video games or complained about homework, Samson spent hours at the library, devouring books on criminology, psychology, and human behavior. His teachers noticed the shift. His once quiet determination sharpened into something fierce, focused. He wasn't trying to be top of the class. He was trying to outrun the helplessness that had defined his childhood. Jamal, on the other hand, withdrew into himself. Losing both parents had folded him inside an invisible shell. He cried easily, avoided crowds, and flinched at sudden sounds. Teachers described him as sensitive, but Samson knew it was deeper. Jamal was carrying a weight too heavy for someone so young. The trauma followed him everywhere, like a shadow that refused to let go. Still, Samson never stopped protecting him. Every night, he checked on Jamal before sleeping, making sure his brother's nightmares hadn't returned. He became both brother and guardian, his father's last lesson echoing in his mind. "My boys need me." By the time Samson reached 17, his path was already carved in stone. He volunteered with community programs, shadowed local officers, and joined every training opportunity he could find. He learned discipline. He learned calm. And he learned to look at chaos without flinching. Uncle Raymond noticed the transformation. One night, over a rare quiet dinner, he said, "You're turning into a man faster than you should, Samson." Samson only nodded. He already knew. College came next. Criminal justice major, high honors, internships with investigative units. And through it all, the same unanswered question pulsed beneath every achievement. What happened to Mom? He never spoke it aloud, but it drove him like a silent engine. The day he graduated, he held the certificate in his hand and felt nothing but resolve. He applied to the police academy the next morning. Training was brutal, physically demanding, mentally exhausting, but Samson excelled. His instructors saw a recruit who didn't break under pressure, who didn't panic, who didn't run from darkness. They praised his discipline, his instincts, his focus. But none of them knew the truth behind it. Samson had already survived pain worse than anything the academy could throw at him. 2 years later, wearing his badge for the first time, Samson felt a strange pull in his chest. Not pride, purpose. He had joined not just to serve, but to find answers buried beneath years of silence. Eventually, through promotions, results, and an unshakable drive, he rose to detective. Not just any detective, one assigned to the very city where his mother vanished without a trace. On his first day walking into the precinct, he passed the bulletin board where cold cases were pinned like forgotten ghosts. Somewhere in that collection of tragedy was his mother's file, old, dusty, but still breathing beneath the paper. Samson paused in front of it. Years had passed, but he hadn't. Jamal, now grown but still fragile in spirit, watched Samson chase justice with a mixture of admiration and fear. He lived quietly, carrying wounds time never healed, but he trusted Samson. He always had. As Samson stood there staring at the cold case board, one truth settled deep in his bones. He was no longer the helpless boy waiting for answers. He was now the man who would uncover them. Chaos arrived at the station that morning in the form of a shaking, furious neighbor, Mrs. Helder Rowe, a woman known for speaking her mind without hesitation. She burst through the double doors of the precinct, her voice trembling with anger and fear as she reported a case that instantly drew the room's attention. "It's Tiger Jeffrey again," she shouted, gripping the counter with both hands as though holding herself up. "He threatened that poor girl with a gun. I heard her screaming before she ran out of the building." The desk sergeant exchanged a weary look with another officer. The name alone, Tiger Jeffrey, carried a history. A man in his late 40s, infamous in his neighborhood for drug abuse, violent outbursts, and a string of unpleasant encounters that had never quite reached the threshold for a major arrest. Most people in his street avoided him like a curse. Mrs. Rowe continued, her words tumbling out in breathless bursts. She was begging him to let her go. I saw her running barefoot, crying. He refused to pay her, then pulled a gun on her. A gun, officer. If she didn't run fast, we'd be talking about a body right now. A hush settled. This wasn't a minor dispute. This was a potential escalation, a threat with a deadly weapon. And in a city where illegal arms were becoming more common, this case needed immediate attention. More neighbors arrived moments later, forming a small crowd of witnesses. They shared the same story in different voices. This isn't the first time he's pulled something like this. He always brings strange women home. He gets high, loses control, starts screaming. Last week he threatened a delivery boy. That man is trouble walking on two legs. The complaints painted a clear picture. Tiger Jeffrey wasn't just troublesome, he was dangerous. And now he had leveled up from harassment to armed threat. Detective Samson Woods listened carefully from a distance, leaning against a desk with a quiet frown. He had heard the name before. Tiger lived in one of the city's older districts, an area often riddled with petty crime. But this report pushed the situation into a new category. When the prostitute, still shaken, wrapped in a borrowed jacket, arrived moments later, the room's tension thickened. She confirmed the neighbor's story through chattering teeth. "I just wanted my money," she whispered. "That's all." He was high, angry, pacing like some wild dog. When I asked him again, he snapped. He took a gun from under a pile of clothes and pointed it at me. I ran. I didn't look back. Her voice cracked at the final sentence. That was enough. Captain Ramirez stepped forward and issued a crisp command. "We're launching an immediate arrest order for Tiger Jeffrey. Illegal firearm possession. Assault. Threat with a deadly weapon. Bring him in tonight." Officers mobilized instantly. Radios crackled. Briefings began. A unit was assigned for surveillance, another for the arrest itself. Samson quietly joined the second team, slipping on his jacket as he studied the briefing notes. He didn't know yet how deeply this case would cut into his past. To him, this was just another criminal, another mission. But fate had already begun stitching a darker thread. By evening, the arrest team was positioned. Tiger Jeffrey, completely oblivious to the storm heading his way, had stumbled into a local bar, his usual hideout whenever he wanted to stay intoxicated until his world blurred. When news reached the officers that he had been spotted, the operation moved swiftly. They cornered him before he even realized the police were inside. Drunk, confused, and disoriented, Tiger tried to protest when he was handcuffed. "What gun? I don't own no gun," he slurred. But the officers weren't listening. They didn't need to. He was escorted out of the bar and into the police vehicle as the night crowd silently watched. Most of them recognized him. None felt pity. Back at the precinct, Samson watched as Tiger was processed, photographed, fingerprinted, logged. The man's eyes were bloodshot, his breath heavy with alcohol, his entire demeanor dripping with careless arrogance. Samson studied him carefully, unaware that this man held a piece of his past he never knew he was missing. The unlicensed gun was still unaccounted for, and officers prepared to search Tiger's apartment next. What they didn't expect was that the investigation, what started as a simple arrest, was about to open a door into a 12-year-old mystery. One Samson thought he was strong enough to face. He wasn't. Not yet. The night air carried the thick smell of cheap liquor and cigarette smoke as Detective Samson Woods stepped out of the patrol car. The neon lights of Rusty Anchor Bar flickered weakly, buzzing like they were tired of staying alive. The bar was a known magnet for the city's drifters, addicts, and people who had long surrendered their lives to chaos. And tonight, Tiger Jeffrey was one of them. Inside, the bar was dim, almost cave-like. Conversations were low and slurred, the floor sticky from spilled drinks, the ambience drenched in trouble. As soon as Samson and the other detectives pushed open the door, several heads turned. Even in this part of town, police presence was enough to sober the room for a moment. Tiger Jeffrey sat slumped in a corner booth, a half-empty bottle of rum in his hand. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, his hair wild like he hadn't touched a comb in months. He didn't notice the detectives approaching until Samson's partner, Detective Miles, tapped the table. "Tiger Jeffrey," Miles said sternly, "stand up. You're under arrest." Tiger blinked, confused by the sudden intrusion. "Ours for what?" he mumbled, words tangled with drunken slush. "I ain't done nothing, dot." Samson watched him closely. There was no sign of fear in Tiger's expression, only annoyance, like an adult being scolded by children. The arrogance was almost suffocating. "You threatened a woman with a firearm," Samson said. "We have witnesses. You're coming with us." Tiger's face twisted with indignation as he belched loudly. "Gun? I ain't got no gun. People just talkin'." "Lies. All lies," he barked, trying to push off the booth seat, only to wobble clumsily. The detectives didn't bother arguing. Two of them seized his arms and yanked him upright. Tiger struggled weakly, but the alcohol had left his body limp and cowardly. As they cuffed him, the bar crowd began murmuring again, returning to their drinks as though this arrest was just another nightly performance. Outside, Tiger was shoved gently, but firmly, into the back of the patrol vehicle. He continued protesting, insisting he'd been framed, swearing at invisible enemies. Samson stood beside the car, arms crossed, analyzing the man through the window. Tiger's eyes met his briefly, just long enough for Samson to see something unsettling buried beneath the drunken chaos. A flicker of guilt? Recognition? Or was it simply the paranoia of a man with too much to hide? Either way, Samson felt a familiar tightness settle in his chest. It was instinct. Something about Tiger didn't sit right. On the drive to Tiger's apartment, the man kept rambling. "I swear on my life, I don't own no gun. I'm innocent. They all hate me. Them neighbors, Liars. All of them. Miles rolled his eyes. He's drunk out of his mind, he muttered. Drunk or not, Sampson replied, he had a weapon. We just haven't found it yet. When they reached Tiger's apartment building, a run-down, peeling structure that looked one gust of wind away from collapse, the detectives prepared themselves. They brought Tiger inside, still cuffed, still ranting. His apartment was worse than they expected. Clothes piled everywhere. Broken beer bottles on the floor. A sour smell that clung to the walls. An environment shaped by years of addiction and neglect. Search everywhere, Miles ordered. Sampson stepped deeper into the room, a flashlight cutting through the dimness. He scanned every surface, drawers, cabinets, beneath blankets, behind furniture. Tiger sat on the couch, head hanging low, muttering curses under his breath as officers tore through the mess. I told you, he shouted suddenly. I ain't got no. Save it, Sampson cut in sharply. The search continued with relentless precision. Every noise, every object shifting, every footstep echoed through Sampson's mind. He wasn't sure why, but something about this place, this man, stirred a strange unease deep inside him. As he scanned the small desk in the corner, something odd caught his eye, an object half hidden beneath a stack of old newspapers. He reached for it, but before his fingers touched it, he paused. A feeling, cold and foreboding, crept up his spine. Tiger had stopped muttering. He was staring at Sampson, eyes wide, breathing shallow. It was the first time Tiger Jeffrey had looked genuinely afraid. Sampson narrowed his gaze, not knowing that this moment, this tiny shift in the man's expression, was the beginning of a truth he never expected to uncover. Behind him, another detective called out, "Found the gun!" But Sampson didn't turn around. Not yet. Whatever he had found on that desk, whatever had made Tiger's drunken bravado collapse into fear, was far bigger than a missing firearm, and Sampson was about to pick it up. Tiger Jeffrey's apartment felt less like a living space and more like the inside of a collapsing mind. Clothes lay everywhere, clean mixed with dirty, all wrinkled, all forgotten. Beer cans rolled under boots as detectives moved around. The air held a sour heaviness, the kind that came from too many nights of intoxication and too few days of sanity. But Sampson Woods wasn't distracted by the chaos around him. His eyes were sharp, his focus cutting through the clutter like a blade. Something in his chest had tightened the moment he stepped inside, an instinct he had learned never to ignore. Detective Miles barked orders from the living room. Check everywhere. Under furniture, closet, drawers. Tiger's good at hiding things. Sampson moved toward the far corner of the room where a crooked wooden desk sat under a dim, flickering bulb. The desk looked as though it had survived a flood, a fire, and a war. On its surface lay a mess of crumpled bills, cigarette butts, broken pens, and outdated newspapers. But it wasn't the top that drew Sampson's attention. It was the small drawer half open, as if someone tried to close it hastily. He crouched and pulled the drawer open fully. Inside, he found nothing unusual at first. Old receipts, a rusted lighter, a half-empty pack of pills, a torn envelope. Still, his instincts nudged him to keep digging. He pushed aside the clutter, his fingers brushing against something hard, rectangular, and oddly heavier than paper. He lifted it out slowly. It was a photo frame. Dust covered the glass like a thin layer of ash, the edges dented from years of neglect. Something inside Sampson locked into place, like his body recognized danger before his mind did. He wiped the surface with his sleeve. Then the world stopped moving. Inside the frame was a photograph of Tiger Jeffrey, smiling, hugging a woman Sampson had lived his whole life trying to remember without pain. Mrs. Harriet Woods. His mother. His missing mother. Sampson didn't breathe. The apartment noise faded to a distant hum. All he could see was his mother's face, her warm smile captured in a moment he had never seen. She looked younger, happier. Her head rested gently on Tiger's shoulder, as if they shared a bond deeper than a casual acquaintance. And Tiger, despite the drugs, the chaos, the criminal record, looked almost human in that photograph. Clean. Presentable. Someone she could have known. Someone she could have trusted. But why was he hugging her? Why was the picture in his apartment? Why had he hidden it? Samson's chest tightened painfully. Years of unanswered questions, years of quiet suffering, years of forced acceptance, all collided inside him. Without a word, he slid the photograph out of the frame. His hands shook, but his face remained still, unreadable. He folded the picture and slipped it into his jacket pocket, pressing the fabric down firmly. No one saw him. No one needed to, not yet. Behind him, Tiger Jeffrey sat cuffed on the couch, watching with wide, terrified eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But Samson felt his stare like a blade against his back. Tiger knew what he saw. Samson didn't turn around. He couldn't. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. The world inside him had tilted dangerously. Suddenly, a voice shattered the tension. "We found the gun!" Detective Ron shouted from the bedroom. The other officers rushed toward the noise, excitement rising as they recovered the weapon linked to the assault. Evidence. Open and shut case. A win for the precinct. But Samson barely heard them. He stood frozen beside the desk, staring at the empty frame in his hand. The cracked glass reflected his face, a mix of anger, fear, and something darker brewing beneath. That photograph was more than evidence. It was a door into the past, a door he wasn't sure he was ready to open. But he had no choice now. Tiger Jeffrey wasn't just a criminal. He was tied to Samson's mother. And this discovery, this single photograph, was about to drag Samson into a truth 12 years buried under silence and lies. The interrogation room was small, harshly lit, and suffocating with tension. The metallic scent of disinfectant mingled with the faint odor of stale coffee. Tiger Jeffrey sat slouched in the chair, cuffed, eyes darting nervously around the walls as if they might whisper secrets at him. Detective Samson Woods entered slowly, his gaze fixed. The rest of the team lingered in the doorway, papers and evidence folders in their hands, but Samson didn't acknowledge them. The room felt heavy, like the air itself was waiting for something to be revealed. "Mr. Jeffrey," Samson began, voice steady and cold, "we found a gun in your apartment." "Illegal possession. You threatened a woman with it." Tiger blinked slowly, his drunken arrogance fading slightly under the intensity of Samson's stare. "I don't know what you're talking about," he mumbled, his voice thick and slurred. "I don't have a gun. You got nothing on me." Samson's eyes narrowed. There was something in Tiger's expression, a twitch, a hesitation, that made him suspect there was more than simple denial at play. He straightened and motioned for the other detectives. "Step out for a moment," he said quietly, almost conversationally. The others hesitated. A tense silence passed, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent light above. Finally, they left, closing the door behind them. Now alone, Samson pulled the folded photograph from his jacket pocket and placed it gently on the table. He didn't speak at first. His eyes never left Tiger's. The man's gaze flicked down, caught on the image, and something unguarded passed over his face. A twitch of recognition, a flash of fear, or maybe guilt. "How do you know this woman?" Samson asked finally, his voice calm but unrelenting. The question carried more than curiosity. It carried the weight of 12 years of unanswered questions, of a childhood spent haunted by absence and mystery. Tiger's face changed. For a heartbeat, he looked almost human, softening as if Samson had asked about someone he had lost. "That's my wife," he said, voice low, rehearsed, a shadow of sorrow playing across his features. "She traveled abroad for work. She'll be back soon." Samson's gaze didn't waver. He could see the cracks, the hesitation in the story, the way Tiger avoided looking him directly in the eyes. Something was wrong, painfully wrong, and Samson knew instinctively that this man was hiding more than just a gun. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the quiet hum of the fluorescent light. Samson simply rose from his chair and turned toward the door. Without another word, he left the room, closing the door behind him softly but deliberately. He walked down the corridor slowly, his mind racing. The photograph burned in his thoughts, not just as evidence, but as a connection to the woman who had vanished from his life all those years ago. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't force a confession. He let the silence do its work. Tiger remained in the room, staring at the photograph. Alone now, the pretense of sadness had slipped slightly. He tried to compose himself, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of panic that Samson had already seen. Something had been stirred, something he hadn't anticipated. Samson's quiet exit left more pressure in the room than any interrogation could. By simply walking away, he handed Tiger a choice he didn't want to make, but instinctively, Samson knew Tiger couldn't resist the weight of the truth forever. And somewhere deep down, Samson felt the first pulse of a breakthrough, the edge of a revelation that had been waiting 12 long years to surface. The photograph on the table was no longer just a picture. It was the key to unlocking a secret buried in darkness. Tiger shifted in his seat, the denial faltering, the story unraveling, though he did not know it yet. And outside the room, Samson walked quietly, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the question settle where it belonged. On the man who had kept Harriet Woods hidden from the world, and from her own children, for far too long. Samson Woods returned to the interrogation room with a measured calm that belied the storm inside him. In his hands, he held the Woods family portrait, a snapshot of his father, his mother, and him and Jamal, frozen in a memory from years ago when life had seemed safe and whole. He placed it gently on the table next to the dusty old photograph he had found in Tiger Jeffrey's apartment. The contrast between the two images was stark, one a happy family from the past, the other a secret connection to a man who had no right to hold it. He leaned forward slightly, letting the silence stretch like a taut wire between himself and Tiger. The detective's voice cut through the tension, calm, deliberate. "Strange," he said slowly, almost conversationally. "I don't remember my mother having two husbands." The words hung in the air, simple yet devastating. Tiger's face, once flushed with arrogance and bravado, drained of color. The room seemed to shrink around him. His eyes flicked nervously between the two photographs, as if trying to conjure a memory that could explain them, but his mind stumbled, trapped in the corner of its own lies. "That's not... I mean," Tiger stuttered, his words broken, disjointed, meaningless. He opened his mouth again, and nothing came out. The rehearsed sorrow, the casual arrogance, the lies he had depended on for years, they all collapsed under the weight of that single statement. Samson watched him carefully, letting the silence do its work. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply waited. Every second of hesitation, every failed attempt at explanation, tightened the invisible noose around Tiger's facade. The other detectives, who had been lingering just outside, stepped back in at Samson's subtle signal. Their presence was deliberate but unobtrusive, like shadows circling a trapped animal. Samson's gaze met theirs briefly. "Press him," he said quietly. "Press him until he confesses." The officers leaned in, their questions pointed, unrelenting. "Tiger, tell us what this is. How do you know her? Where is she?" Tiger's hands fidgeted in his lap. He looked from the photographs to the detectives, back again, every instinct screaming at him to fabricate another story, another lie. But the walls were closing in. There were no more shadows to hide in, no more alibis, no more false grief to lean on. The first tremors of panic began to show. He swallowed hard, but his throat felt dry, parched with fear. It's complicated," he whispered, almost inaudible, but the officers leaned closer, sensing the break. Samson's calm, measured presence was relentless. He didn't shout or scold. He simply let the truth loom, hanging over Tiger like a storm ready to strike. He saw it in the man's eyes, the recognition that the past he had tried to bury, the secret he had held for years, was finally catching up with him. Minutes stretched, the room filled with an almost unbearable tension. Tiger's stuttering escalated to desperate murmurs. He tried to fabricate a story, then tried to backtrack, then tried to remain silent, but every attempt crumbled under Samson's unwavering gaze and the unspoken weight of the photographs. The silence was punctuated only by the shallow breaths of Tiger and the steady, controlled presence of Samson. The detective didn't flinch. He didn't need to. He knew the truth was already breaking Tiger from within. Finally, with his back against the wall, the lies dissolved. The carefully constructed illusion of grief, of innocence, of harmless domestic life, fell apart completely. Tiger's eyes widened, his mouth opened, and at last, words escaped in a panicked, guilty rush, the first honest confession since Harriet Woods vanished. And in that moment, Samson knew the truth was finally surfacing. 12 years of questions, pain, and mystery were about to reach the daylight, and justice, long overdue, was finally within reach. The room felt suffocating, heavy with the weight of years of secrets, lies, and unanswered questions. Tiger Jeffrey sat slumped in the chair, sweat glistening on his forehead, hands trembling in cuffed desperation. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any escape, any imaginary crack in the walls that could let him disappear. But there was none. Samson Woods, calm and unyielding, leaned forward, placing both hands on the table, his gaze locked on the man who had haunted his family's past for over a decade. "You're done running," Samson said quietly. "Tell me the truth." Tiger's breathing was erratic, his bravado from earlier completely stripped away. For a moment, he seemed frozen in terror, the weight of his own guilt pressing down like a physical force. Then, in a broken, stammering whisper, the truth began to spill. She wasn't my wife," Tiger said, his voice almost lost in a strangled sigh. "Harriet, she wasn't. She was my concubine. I kept her because she came to me. Every time she could. Every time she left that house, she'd sneak to mine." Samson didn't flinch. He didn't react. He simply let the words sink in, letting the room absorb the revelation like water soaking into dry soil. Tiger's gaze fell to the table, shame and panic flickering across his face. He swallowed hard. The last time I saw her, she came over that day. After shopping. She refused. His voice cracked, trailing off. He looked up, eyes wild, and continued, the story tumbling out in a rush. "She refused to. I told her we could. I tried, but she wouldn't. We argued. I pushed her. Just a shove. I didn't mean." His hands shook violently as he relived the moment. She fell onto the bed frame. The wooden. She hit her head. She was dead before I even realized it. The room went silent. Every breath, every shuffle of feet, every distant hum of fluorescent lights seemed magnified. Samson's expression remained calm, his eyes locked on Tiger, but inside his mind, the past 12 years of unanswered questions surged like a storm. Tiger's voice dropped to a whisper, coated in despair. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I buried her, behind the old shed, shallow, just enough to hide her. I thought no one would ever find out. Samson didn't speak immediately. He only reached for his phone, his fingers steady, methodical, as he dialed the location he had already memorized from Tiger's confession. He listened to the confirmation, his jaw tightening. Every detail of the conversation, the way Tiger trembled, the hesitation in his voice, the guilt he couldn't hide, was evidence of a crime that had festered for over a decade. The other detectives, waiting outside the room, were called in swiftly. Samson gave them the coordinates, his tone clipped and professional. "Go. Now. Bring a team. Don't disturb anything until we're there." As officers scrambled into vehicles, sirens piercing the night air, Tiger slumped further in his chair, eyes wide, chest heaving. The walls of lies he had built around himself had crumbled in moments, leaving him exposed, terrified, and finally accountable. Samson sat back slightly, exhaling. He didn't feel triumph, only the hollow, chilling weight of closure drawing near. 12 years of questions, grief, and pain had led to this moment. The place behind the old shed awaited the truth, and soon Harriet Woods, long vanished and mourned, would be found. Outside, the city lights blurred past as police vehicles raced to the location. Inside the station, a man who had lived for lies was left to face the consequences. And in that silence, Samson realized something he had not allowed himself to feel until now. Justice, long delayed, was finally within reach. The night air hung thick with tension as the police convoy arrived at the outskirts of the city, where Tiger Jeffrey's confession had led them. The old shed stood neglected at the edge of a field, its wooden planks warped and splintered from years of decay. The scent of damp earth and rot clung to the air, mingling with a faint tang of fear and anticipation that everyone seemed to carry. Cadaver dogs, trained to detect the faintest trace of human remains, sniffed around the perimeter. Their noses twitched with relentless determination, and then, as if in unison, the dogs began to bark, sharp, urgent, insistent. The sound cut through the quiet night like a warning bell. Detectives moved quickly, shovels in hand, digging into the cold soil where the dogs had signaled. The earth, hardened by years of neglect, resisted their efforts at first. Dust rose with every scoop, settling on their sleeves, their faces, and their boots. They worked in silence, the only sounds the scrape of metal against dirt and the occasional bark of the dogs, growing louder, more insistent. And then it happened. A dull thud resonated beneath the shovels. One of the detectives paused, brushing the dirt away with trembling hands. The edge of something rigid appeared, white against the dark soil. Shovels paused mid-air, hearts pounding, breaths held. Slowly, carefully, the officers continued to dig. Layer by layer, the soil gave way. And there it was, a skeleton, fragile yet unmistakably human. Its position suggested it had been placed in haste, carelessly, with no thought beyond hiding it. But what drew everyone's eyes, and cut through the night with piercing clarity, was a small detail, the bracelet on the wrist. A delicate silver band, tarnished with age and soil, yet still recognizable. Samson's chest tightened as he saw it, the same bracelet his mother had always worn, the one she had never taken off in life. For a long moment, no one spoke. Time seemed suspended, every second stretching into eternity. The wind whispered through the trees, the shed groaned, and the only movement came from the detectives brushing away the last clumps of dirt. Samson stood slightly apart, knees trembling, hands gripping the edge of his coat. He didn't cry out, didn't sob, but the grief pressed into him like a physical weight. His breath hitched, tears pooling silently in the corners of his eyes. 12 years of questions, 12 years of longing, 12 years of uncertainty, all converged in that single moment, crystallized in a bracelet on a skeleton's wrist. The officers worked methodically, removing the remains with care. Forensic experts began their assessments immediately, collecting samples, photographing the site, and preparing to confirm the identity of the long-lost woman. Samson watched every movement, his heart caught between disbelief and relief. After all these years, the mystery of his mother's disappearance was ending, but the grief was heavier than he had imagined. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the police officer in charge spoke. His voice was solemn, carrying the weight of confirmation. "Detective Woods, the remains. They belong to Mrs. Harriet Woods." Samson nodded slowly, unable to speak. The confirmation brought no celebration, no relief in the conventional sense, only a quiet, restrained grief that settled deep in his chest. The mother he had mourned, the woman he had longed to see again, was gone forever. Yet at the same time, there was clarity. There was truth. Around him, detectives worked with efficiency, but Samson hardly noticed. He knelt beside the small patch of earth, letting the wind brush his face, letting the silence hold him. His mind replayed memories of his mother, her laughter, her warmth, the life she had once filled the house with. He pressed his hand to the soil, imagining her presence, whispering a farewell he had waited 12 years to utter. Justice had been served, the mystery solved, but the grief would linger, quiet and unyielding, like the earth that now held her body. And for the first time in over a decade, Samson allowed himself to feel the full weight of her absence, and the bittersweet closure that came with it. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with people whose eyes flicked nervously between the defendant and the bench. Cameras and reporters were barred from the inside, but whispers and murmurs filled the air like a low, persistent hum. Tiger Jeffrey sat in the dock, slumped, his usual arrogance gone, replaced with a hollow emptiness. He had no words left, no lies to weave, no defenses to construct. The evidence against him was overwhelming, unrelenting, and undeniable. Detectives filed into the room, witnesses prepared to recount the details of Tiger's crimes. The photographs, the old image of Harriet Woods in his apartment, the Woods family portrait, the bracelets still on her skeletal remains, were laid out meticulously on the table. Forensic reports, witness testimonies, and the cadaver dog findings were presented systematically, each piece fitting together like the pieces of a puzzle long hidden. Samson Woods sat in the gallery, his brother Jamal beside him. They were both older now, shaped by the years of loss, grief, and quiet determination. Samson's jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the defendant. He felt neither triumph nor malice, only a solemn satisfaction that the truth had finally come to light. Jamal, quieter and more contemplative, clutched his brother's hand lightly, grounding himself in the shared moment of justice. The prosecution recounted the events with steady, precise clarity. Harriet Woods had been alive, known to Tiger Jeffrey as a concubine, visiting him secretly while she was married. On the day of her death, she had refused Tiger's advances. An argument had ensued. In a moment of rage, he had shoved her onto a bed, causing a fatal injury. Panicked, he had concealed her body behind his old shed, believing he could hide the truth forever. The defense tried to argue mitigating circumstances, rage, intoxication, momentary lapse, but the evidence was too clear, too damning. The photographs, forensic reports, and Tiger's own confession left no room for doubt. Even his repeated attempts to claim innocence crumbled under the weight of proof. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the verdict, each word deliberate, each syllable heavy with gravity. Guilty of manslaughter and concealment of a corpse. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Tiger's face twitched with disbelief, but there was no escape from what had been earned. The judge continued, voice steady and unyielding. Sentence: death by hanging. May justice be served. Tiger Jeffrey slumped in his seat, the finality of the words pressing down on him like a physical weight. 4 years, he had hidden behind lies, alcohol, and arrogance. But now, the law had reached him. Justice had arrived, long overdue, and there was no denying it. The scene shifted months later. Samson and Jamal stood together at the grave of their father, James Woods. The sky was overcast, a somber gray that mirrored the gravity of the moment. In their hands, they carried flowers, white and delicate, a symbol of both mourning and respect. The earth beneath the gravestone was damp from a recent rain, the scent of wet soil mingling with the faint fragrance of the flowers. Samson knelt first, placing his bouquet carefully, his eyes lingering on the engraving that held their father's name. Jamal followed, a quiet presence, laying his own flowers beside his brother's. They stood side by side, a united front against the tragedy that had shaped their lives. Though their mother's death had left a scar that could never fully heal, this moment, standing at their father's grave, knowing the man responsible had finally been held accountable, brought a sense of closure they had long yearned for. The wind whispered gently through the cemetery, rustling the leaves of nearby trees. Samson took a deep breath, closing his eyes, feeling a mixture of grief, relief, and quiet triumph. Jamal rested his hand on his brother's shoulder. No words were needed. In the silence, they shared a bond forged in tragedy, strengthened by truth, and finally, tempered by justice. The past would always be a part of them, but in that moment, with justice served and the shadows of lies dispelled, the Woods brothers felt a small measure of peace. The cycle of pain had ended, and the legacy of their parents, once shattered by deceit and cruelty, could now rest with dignity in memory.